Well, good morning, everyone. I want to bring greetings in the name of Christ. You can turn in your Bibles to 1 Peter chapter 3. So I don't know how many of you have ever flown in I would say, Northwest especially. You may see it all over the country. But I remember the first time I experienced it. I looked down and see these huge green circles. I'm like, what in the world is going on? And then you realize that it's pivot irrigation. It's circle irrigation where you have a central water source and there's this huge apparatus that makes a circle and it waters arid land and it's visible for a long way off. And you know, all around it's brown, but then there's this beautiful green spot. And I guess that's my parable for this morning as we're thinking about our subject before us this morning. I'd like to think about the pivot. The title of the message this morning is Fulfill Your Calling. And that title comes from our verse 9 of our text today. It says, knowing that you were called to this. And it also is found in chapter 2 and verse 21. It says, for to this you were called. So the question is, what's this calling that he's talking about? What are we called to? Well, I think the pivot, so to speak, the central thing that we're thinking about, and over the last two messages we've been talking about submission to authority and coming under, surrender to Christ, surrendering to His Lordship. And I think the pivot to this was what we talked about last time, where it says that for this we're called because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow in His steps. So what I would like to think about this morning is all this talk we've had about surrender and submission to the authorities all comes back to that central pivot of Christ, our example, who and it says He's left us an example that we should follow in His steps. So the calling is that we follow the example of Christ in humility, submitting to authority. Jesus said in John 6:38, for I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of Him who sent me. This is how He lived. This is how Jesus lived. And the ultimate test of that came in the garden, where Jesus, facing the cross, said, Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but thine be done. And so we see Jesus as the ultimate example of submitting to the authority that He found Himself under, the headship that we read about. And other places Jesus said, I only do what the Father tells me. So that's the example. That's the pivot that all this subject that we've been talking about pivots around. You know, this is totally in opposition to what is held in high esteem in our society today. In the American culture, there's sort of this attitude of bow to no one. We've heard the term rugged individualism. It's sort of what the American is. He's a rugged individualist. But you know what? I've been making an observation, and that is that this rugged individualism, so to speak, that is sort of dressed up in good terms, if left unchecked, leads to lawlessness. And I see that in our political system, in our government, just in recent years, where people choose to ignore subpoenas. They're subpoenaed by courts and so on, and they just ignore them. Laws are made, and people they say, well, it doesn't apply to me, and they just thumb their noses at that. And you know, that is the end result of an unwillingness to submit to authority. And God is, and when He created mankind and He created our society, He created this whole system of checks and balances, authorities, and so on that He has established. There's an order to it, and when we start to mess with that order, the end result is lawlessness and anarchy and chaos, and we're starting to see the seeds of that in our society, because in little ways people have flaunted the authority, and now we see it happening even in the higher levels. We see it in our governments, we see it in churches, we see it in homes, and if we're honest, we can even sense it in our own lives. Rebellion and refusal to submit to God-ordained authority results in lawlessness and disintegration. So what is our calling? Our calling is to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. They're at that pivot point. And, people say, well, I haven't found my calling yet. I'm not sure what my calling is. Well, I'm here to propose to you this morning that this is a calling that is for all of us. In fact, it says that here later in our text. It affects our actions. If we just jump back a little bit in chapter 2, verse 12, it says, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works, which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. So they see your good works. There's something that they can observe. It affects our relationship to the laws of the land. We talked about that last time. Submission to government authorities, even when we look and say it's ridiculous, it doesn't make any sense. It affects our relationship to our employers. It affects our relationship to our husbands. It affects our relationships to our wives. It affects our relationships to each other. And it is influential. Everyone wants influence. And here we see that verse I just read. It says, when they see your good works, what do? They glorify God. They glorify God in the day of visitation. He says down here in we also read this last time, it says, for this is the will of God, that by doing good, you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. So we can have an influence on the society around us when they see the good things that you've done. We all want to make a difference. We all want to have influence. We have this term this day in our society now called influencers. There's people that are called influencers, social media influencers. And I just checked. The highest the person with the most influence, I guess you would say, that has the most following, is actually a soccer star, Cristiano Ronaldo. 836 million people follow him on the different platforms. The second highest is a singer, Selena Gomez, at 581 million followers. And then I thought, well, I wonder if there's any religious influencers that have even a little bit of that, as far as numbers. And the highest religious, and I'll put that in quotes, because when you kind of look at what they are, I'm not quite sure Jesus would be pleased. 2 million followers is about the highest that there is. Most of them are in the thousands and hundreds of thousands. So I just like to point out that that's the way of the world. That's how they try to influence people. But this passage, Peter says that we can have an influence on our society by simply following Jesus and on what he says in submission, in the willingness to come under his lordship. And it's the opposite of what the world says. They says the way to influence people is to somehow put yourself out there. There's a quote I found. It says this: "Make no mistake about it. Ungodly people are very careful observers of godly people. They watch what you do. They listen to your words. Frankly, our values offend them. Our conversation silences them. Our demeanor will convict them. Our love for them and others will embarrass them. And our peace and joy, even in the midst of great adversity, will baffle them. And I think there's a sense in which that is true. So I'd like to read then, and I think there's probably no more a place where it doesn't speak louder than in our homes and in our marriages. And that's what we want to look at a little bit this morning. So let's read chapter 3, verses 1 to 12. Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be outward, arranging of the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. Husbands likewise, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another. Love as brothers, be tenderhearted, be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. For he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. So first of all, there's a word to the wives. Maybe a word to the wise as well. He says here, likewise. So, likewise, in the same way, in the same manner as we've been talking about, again, brings us back to that pivot point, which is Jesus. He says that wives should be submissive to their own husbands. So, it says that to be submissive to their own husbands, and this is all about God's order. You know, the whole idea of submission to a wife submitting to her husband is anathema in our society today. They somehow have this idea that it means that you're somehow taking a lower, demeaning place. But this is all about God's order. It's not about value, it's about order. And God himself, there's order in the Godhead. In society, in mankind, there's order that God has put in place to make society run in a specific way. And when it's followed, it works. It's successful. There's nothing about being of lesser value. And the world has taken this whole idea of submission, and they've distorted it to the point where somehow it has a very negative connotation. And they've not only done that with marriage, and as I've already mentioned, they're doing that with all of God's authority structure. Children to parents, and society to government, and government to whoever they're responsible to. The world has just taken that, Satan has taken that and distorted that whole thing. But when we step back and take a look at it from God's perspective and say, you know what, when he made the world and he formed society, he put all this in place, the submission to authority, so that we can be blessed, so that society actually works. So Peter says that wives are to be submissive to their own husbands, and I thought, well, why does he make a specific point of saying to your own husband? Well, I don't know. I don't know if I have the answer to that. But one thing I thought about is there's a temptation, especially, he seems to be talking here, and maybe in the context of a less than ideal situation. And I think there's a temptation to compare your situation possibly with someone else and say, you know what, it'd be a lot easier if I was in a different situation, if I had a husband like so-and-so's husband over here. And he says, no, I want you to be submissive to your own husband. And then he says something that's really, really incredible here, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives, without a word. And that really stood out to me, that, again, we're talking about influencers. Everyone wants to be an influencer. And again, if we go back to that pivot point and we follow the way that Christ ordained, there's tremendous influence there. I don't think this is saying that it's going to work out in every case. But it says some may be won. And it's not by our speech. It's not by necessarily the words that we say, but it's by your conduct. It says when they observed your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. And that word fear there has the idea of reverence or respect. So here's a wife. She's submitting to her husband's authority. She's chaste, which means she's everything is in line. It's clean, pure, modest. And you know, there's not only the temptation to compare your husband maybe with another husband, but there's also a temptation to influence your husband through an appeal to the flesh. And speaking of influencers, probably if you look up most influencers, that's what it's all about. This is the way you should dress. This is the way you should present yourself. This is your morning routine, blah, 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 and so on. But what's he say here? He said the ornament that we should put on is not, the adornment should not be outward. And if you have a New King James, it says merely outward, and that word is in italics. It's been added. I think it means what it says. Don't let your adornment be outward. The arranging of the hair, the wearing of gold, or the putting on of fine apparel. There's a temptation, I think, if your husband isn't maybe what you want him to do, to make that appeal through the flesh or through the carnal things. So if I have the right hairstyle, if I doll myself up, put a few jangles and dangles on, and wear the right brand of clothes, the right kind of thing, that somehow I'm going to appeal to my husband. And he says, no. Rather let it be the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. It's incorruptible. It's without compare. And it says that it's precious in the sight of God. Do we believe that this morning? Do we believe that far surpassing anything that we can do on the outside, that God looks on a gentle and quiet spirit and a wife submitting to her husband as a thing of immense beauty. And it's very precious to him. And you know, I feel like if the appeal was made to the flesh, then the chances of winning our husband to be a spirit-filled person, we're making the wrong appeal. And I think this goes across the line, you know, for sisters especially when we're thinking about how we present ourselves. What is it this morning that you're cultivating in your life? Is it that meek, quiet, chaste spirit, or is it outward? Is it outward stuff? Now, he's not talking here about being neat and clean and feminine and attractive. I don't see that here at all. To be slothful in dress and cleanliness and femininity, I think is a turnoff. So he's not talking about that. But I think we see it all around us. I'd like to call our attention to some verses in 2 Corinthians 4:7. Verse 7 says, "But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us." So let's get one thing straight. First of all, we're all earthen vessels. We're all subject to decay, and we're weak. And then in verse 16 of 2 Corinthians chapter 4, he says, "Therefore we do not lose heart, even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is renewed day by day." And I especially think of that as the aging process goes on. I'm in my 50s now, and it sort of irritates me. I can't do what I used to do. I get sore. I was doing a little remodeling project and in the house, and by the end of the day, I'm worn out. We start to sag and bag. We start to get wrinkles. So and I see this in the world. What's the response? Especially, I would say, especially among women. Do up your hair somehow. Hang a couple more gold earrings on, and try to somehow dress up this old earthen temple that's fading by putting a bunch of stuff on the outside. My observation is that when I see a godly woman who has cultivated all her life a good character, that's beautiful. Way more beautiful than someone that you look and say, boy, she's trying really, really hard to push that aging thing back. She's trying really, really hard to make some kind of an appeal, and it's simply not there. It's simply not there. But show me a Christian woman who all her life has cultivated that modest, quiet spirit. And I actually think it's not only beautiful in a spiritual sense, but I think it is actually physically beautiful. When I see our sisters, in their older years versus what I see out there, there's no comparison. A life of trying to make it all happen, actually in the end works against, I think, the very thing that they're trying to do. I'd just really like to encourage you this morning as sisters to really cultivate what Jesus said. Go back to that pivot and say, the thing that's precious to God is that meek and quiet spirit. The thing that's going to win your husband is not the outer. It's that without a word, your actions are very, very, very influential. Way more influential, I believe, than all the social influencers out there. Sister Virginia wasn't known for how she dressed. She wasn't known for her hair. She wasn't known for the jewelry she had on. But she was known for who she was. The gentle, quiet spirit. And I think that's what we all need to strive for. He gives the example of Sarah then here. He says, "For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves." He's not saying that we shouldn't not adorn ourselves. It's what are we adorning ourselves with? And he said, Sarah adorned herself by being submissive to her own husband, just like Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. And I thought it was interesting. I went back and read a little bit about Sarah, and the whole experience with Abimelech was when Sarah was 99 years old, and he was afraid. Even at 99, he was afraid. Abraham was afraid that his wife was so attractive that someone was going to come and try to steal him away from her. And I think that just illustrates to me what he's saying is true. That when you cultivate what Sarah cultivated, which was submission to her husband, she followed Abraham where Abraham went, the country he didn't know where he was going, and she followed after him. Even though she struggled a little bit when the whole promise of Isaac came, Hebrews 11 says that she was faithful in that. And it says she wasn't afraid with any terror. In other words, she wasn't afraid to submit to her husband. A lot of people, I think, are afraid. If I submit, then somehow it's gonna rob me of my individuality. She trusted Abraham. She wasn't afraid to trust him, and she wasn't afraid to submit. And in our society, that's just not acceptable. Some husbands maybe aren't so easy to submit to, and still, that's what we're called to do. Now we have a word to husbands. It says, husbands likewise. What are we talking about likewise? Go back to that pivot, just like Jesus laid down everything that he had and gave himself to the will of the Father. Husbands are to do the same. It says we're to dwell with our wives with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. Paul in Ephesians says we're to love our wives as Christ loved the church and gave his life for it. Dwell with them with understanding, according to knowledge. What's one thing that we have to understand about our wives? Well, it says that, remember, we're earthen vessels. We're all weak, and I think I pointed this out before, but it's weaker. It's not like one is really strong and the other one's weak. And I think he's in a lot of ways talking about just our physical being, and there's a lot of talk these days about men who pretend to be women and how they can go in and just overwhelm in the sports realm. The top female athlete in a particular field can easily be beaten by a high schooler of average ability. They're weaker physically. But I was thinking about that. He says to give honor. So how many of us have maybe a china cupboard or some kind of place where we display vessels? I thought about vessels and dishes, how we display them. What do we put in there in our china cupboards? Do we put our Tupperware in there, or maybe our stainless steel Yetis or whatever? No, we put in that cabinet on display a fine vessel. We treat that vessel different. When we get out our china, we recognize that it's a little bit fragile, and we don't treat it the same as we treat our Tupperware. We don't display our Tupperware either. Boy, come look at my china cupboard full of this wonderful Rubbermaid Pyrex bowls. No, we don't do that. We put it on display, and I had that picture came into my mind when I was thinking about how husbands are to respond to their wives. We give honor to them as a weaker vessel. It doesn't mean they're not important. In fact, in some ways, it elevates them to a higher importance. It says we can be heirs together. Remember, we're yoked together. We're heirs together of the. How does it say? Heirs together, the grace of life. And again, the influence is there. It says that your prayers may not be hindered. So when husband and wife are yoked together, the husband is giving honor. He's recognizing the differences in how God made each of us. He's given that wife a place of honor. He's putting her on display in the china cupboard, so to speak, recognizing that she's something special, that she's weaker than the Tupperware. But we're in this together, and we're heirs of that. And then our prayers have power. We can actually move forward. There's influence there. And then, in case you're feeling left out, it says, finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tenderhearted, be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary blessing, knowing that you were called to this. So we sort of come full circle back to what our calling is. What is our calling? All of you. This calling is for all of us. And he says, first of all, again, if we think of a pivot, I would like to think of these things here sort of as spokes in a wheel. First of all, he says that we're all to be of one mind. My understanding is that the Greek term for this is where we get our word harmony. Each in their place. Be of one mind. How is this possible? This is only possible if we're all connected to that pivot. Again, we go back to that. It's only possible to be of the same mind if we're taking our cues from the same source. And, with harmony, it's not that everyone is actually doing exactly the same thing, but everything that we're thinking fits together, and there's no discordant notes. And it's only by submitting to Christ and His lordship and authority over us that we can ever expect to come together in like-mindedness and unity. Second thing he says we should be a part of our lives, as part of our church, is having compassion one for another, or sympathy. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. So I guess the question that I would ask myself is, what is my knee-jerk reaction when I'm faced with either something good or something bad that happens to my brother or my sister? Is it to weep with those that weep and rejoice with those who rejoice? Satan has this sort of ugly thing that happens is we find ourselves, when someone's really happy, sort of being a downer on it. And when someone's really sad, to kind of rejoice in their troubles. If we're a body, Paul uses the metaphor of a body. If my hand hurts, then the rest of the body responds to that. The whole body feels pain. A proud person puts himself not in cooperation with his brothers and sisters, but in competition with them. And he's saying that should not be. That if we want to fulfill our calling, if we want to fulfill what Christ has for us, then we need to have sympathy and compassion one for each other. The third spoke of this wheel, he says that we should love as brothers. We're family. And the word here, we talk about agape love, and that's very important. But the word here is the word Philadelphia. It's a sort of a family kind of a love. Families stick together, even under a lot of pressure, even when things aren't so good. There's a certain sense where there's a staying power, and I think it should be that way in the church and God's people as well. We don't do this. We don't go say, I'm going to go look for another family because my family always has bacon and eggs on Sunday morning, and there's another family I heard about down the road that they do brunch on Sunday morning or Saturday morning, and they even have pastries and things like that. I mean, we'd say that's ridiculous. We don't change families over those kind of stuff, and yet in a spiritual sense, we see people hopping from here to the other, all over the place, for those kind of things. And I think what Peter's saying here is have brotherly love, have that family connection, we're family. We're going to go through some rough times, but let's stick it out. As a local brotherhood, I believe there should be a bond that is there. He says we're to be tenderhearted. Feel the emotion. When one hurts, we all hurt. God intends to make a people who don't just serve one another, but who want to serve one another. The gospel is making us a people who don't just lay our lives down for the sake of our brothers and sisters, but we delight to lay our lives down. Is that who I am? Jesus says that it was for the joy that was set before him that he endured the cross. The fifth spoke, he says, be courteous, friendly, not rude, humble-minded. Some people have the idea maybe that to be humble is sort of not to take a stand. It's sort of uncertainty. And so a person who stands on the truth and says, I believe this is what's right and we're gonna stick with it, is sometimes blamed for being proud and arrogant. A person who does not take a stand sometimes is looked on as the person who's humble. Well, he's not really. But he's saying that we should be humble-minded. We should not think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think. And yet we need to stand. We need to stand for the truth. And finally, he says that God's people should not return evil for evil or reviling for reviling. And again, it points us back to that pivot where it says that's exactly what Jesus did. When he was reviled, he did not revile again. And he says we're called to that. And I wrote this before I thought about what our Sunday school lesson was, but we have an opportunity to be a living parable to the world around us. It's in the little things that people notice. And people do things to us, little things and big things. They treat us unkindly. They say something that we don't appreciate, and they revile us. What is our response? The response of Christ, who when he was reviled didn't revile again, or are we somehow looking for a way to get even, to take our revenge? The question I want to leave with us this morning is, are you fulfilling your calling? Are you fulfilling your calling? The world says that submission to Christ will somehow cramp my life. It's going to restrict me. The world says that to submit to authorities, the government, my employer, my husband, is bondage. Peter says it's the exact opposite. He says, fulfill your calling so that you can inherit a blessing. It's the way to blessing. It's the true way to blessing. It's the way to true freedom. And Peter then ends this section by quoting from Psalm 34. And I just want you to think about the promise that he gives us here. Especially at the end of he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. And this is the part that really stood out to me. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. If you follow the truth, God's on your side. He's looking out for you. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous. His ears are open to their prayer. He's wanting to hear. He's wanting to aid. He's wanting to help. But the other part is true too. The face of the Lord is against those that do evil. And that's sobering to me. That God is actually against those who do evil. So I just want to challenge us in this whole area of submission. First of all, I think we have to, as primary, we have to submit ourselves to the Lordship of Christ. We have to make Him number one. And then in all these other ways, submission to the government, submission to other authorities in our life, wives submitting to their husbands, husbands submitting to Christ, all that. That is the calling that we're called to, and that is the calling that we need to fulfill. And just remember that pivot, that central thing, that it all comes back to the example that Jesus, and He said we're supposed to walk in His footsteps. And may God give us the grace, the needed grace, the strength and the desire to fulfill that calling. Anyone have any comments?